thank you everybody for joining us, and also happy Black History Month. I know this is the end of the month, but Black history is all year round. And really excited for everyone here to join us for our panel, The Legacy of Redlining Beyond Discriminatory Policy. And also we want to thank everyone in our local committees and also the efforts within the SmithGroup community in creating programming around Black History Month. I hope you all found that very enriching to lead us up to today. And also, if you weren't able to be a part of any of those calls, I'm pretty sure we can provide links so you can access that information, those discussions as well. But you may be aware or may not be aware that this year's national theme for Black History Month is African American in the Arts. And the work that we do at SmithGroup, architecture and engineering is an art form. And we work in the public realm, and it's important for us and necessary to have conversations like this as a collective and not in our silos. So bringing up this topic about redlining not only will help us collectively have a better understanding as a firm, but hopefully empower everyone to reconcile in the everyday work that we do. So want to introduce myself first. And hi, my name is Camille Hampton. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I'm in the DC office. I also am in the cultural studio. And I am a National Jedi Committee member in SmithGroup. So I'll pass it to Kendra. Introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'm Kendra Heisen. I am a landscape architect and urban planner in DC in the Urban Design Studio. And I'll be the moderator for the panel today. And so we have some really enriching information for you all. I think the conversation today is designed to be very candid and vulnerable and honest about some of the things that we're still experiencing with respect to redlining and how it impacts our work as designers. And I think the next slide, Camille, is the kind of setting the tone, right?
Correct.
So we are about to show a 4-minute video. Please turn your volume on. And it's basically going to set the stage and let everybody know, or give everybody a brief understanding of what redlining is and how it has historically impacted communities of color, if you aren't already aware. So the video is by Khalil Gibran, and it just goes into the legacy of redlining. So we can kick that off. Okay, so that hopefully gave a pretty comprehensive overview of what redlining is and the impacts it has created, but there have been some lasting impacts due to redlining on communities of color across the country. You can still see it in places like DC and other cities that are heavily segregated, and people are experiencing disparities in housing, access to food, access to green space, and all sorts of things that are not allowing people to have quality community. And so I'm going to kick it over to Camille to kind of talk through this a little bit more across and how it impacts our work here at SmithGroup.
Right. So we're kind of going to backtrack a little bit and just show some implications of history within the United States and how redlining has impacted those communities, those Black and Brown communities, but also why it's important for us to have knowledge of this. So right here, what you're seeing is a map of the Great Migration from 1910 to 1970. So this is when Black communities migrate to escape racial violence, pursue economic and educational opportunities, and obtain freedom from oppressive Jim Crow. But also within this time, between then and the 1930s, the Homeowners Loan Corporation created the residential security maps, which we know is the redlining to intentionally start to create areas of lack of access. So as you can see here, how this populates with the migration of Black communities and where it overlays on top of where we are at SmithGroup. This laying of information is a lot, and we have to digest this in the conversation we have today, because it's not only important for us as our individual selves, but for us as a firm to understand that we have an obligation to engage and understand the ramifications of redlining, because they affect all the communities that we're serving, and also we aim to serve in the future. And as Khalil's video and as Kendra said, redlining right now and has been goes beyond the plans, right? It ripples into the loss of access and to keep Black people and Brown communities and marginalized communities from access, right? So this contributes to segregation, disinvestment in racial inequities and opportunities for home ownership and wealth accumulation in general. And we break this down into some of the ripple effects, right? So we have housing and lending, which was talked about in the video, but it's the disinvestment and acts as a barrier for home ownership among Black community and people of color. The banks refuse to provide loans and mortgages. In some cases, other worse rates, would-be homeowners would live in these neighborhoods. A restriction in development, so fewer urban amenities, and also stopped Black generational wealth in some aspects because of home ownership. And also the redlining curbed economic development of minority neighborhoods. We're talking about hiring practices as well, which were fewer job opportunities and transportation accessibility. When it comes to education, it's just a lack of resources. So the quality of public school tend to increase with the zip code income bracket. So the inconsistencies in school quality continues because schools are equivocally tied to housing still. And so this economic racial lines divides public school districts as we see them today. So this also not only creates racialized spaces that affect children where they go to school and like the education of those schools and where teachers choose to work, but the success of those schools as well. When we have redline, we're talking about also environmental disparities. So air pollution, water pollution, infrastructure such as highways and interstates, a reduction of green space, creating sacrificial zones where, some people may be deemed less important, where they put places where hazardous structures are that decrease individuals' health. So environmental ties with health, right? And redlining is essentially ground zero for health. There are major consequences to this, such as food deserts, and we talk about food deserts, it's basically communities were lacking stores and for healthy and affordable foods. And this causes, the lack of access for fresh and good quality food as well. So that brings communities to possibly have an increase in poor diets and comorbidities. So as well as that, just related diseases. And then just in general, it's blocking access. It's blocking access to pathways for economic empowerment and development. Redlining created these neighborhoods to be less valuable assets, which contributes to the racial wealth gap. Along with these issues generated through redlining, it also feeds in exacerbating policing and brutality in Black and Brown communities. And I just want to circle back to, just as we rooted this conversation in the arts and why we're talking about this as well. We also want to share that design has been and can be used as expression of resistance, and art has been a way to communicate circumstances and situations by the ones who have been oppressed by the oppressors. So this is art means of like painting, poetry, music, sculptures, mixed media. And in this context, the conversations about redlining and the response to it have been shown through art over years. So this is just some examples of music, murals, the craft and context of call and response, and taking ownership over one's forced upon circumstances and sharing that. And we have this conversation too today to hope for a call to action. We want to have this stronger understanding about redlining and not just knowing, but how we play a role in undoing the systems of harm. At SmithGroup, we're really trying to focus on design justice and curating that, and essentially that is undoing systems of harm. And this quote here that we have by Richard Rothstein, the author of Color of Law, is fitting as we enter into discussion today. it takes us all to create effective change. But to do that, we really need to understand the truths of our history to then really have the best impact we can have for our futures. So we also, as Smith Group, and we believe like the best outcomes of our design solutions come from diverse perspectives, right? And the meeting of the minds. So today is our chance to do that with our electric panelists. So I'm going to pass it off to Kendra.
On the slide though.
Yes.
Thanks, Camille. I wanted to highlight one of the statements out of the quote, just to be clear, about the line that says, African Americans cannot await rectification of past wrongs as a gift, and white Americans collectively do not owe it to African Americans to rectify them. We, all of us, owe this to ourselves as American citizens, whatever routes we or our particular ancestors took to get to this point. We're all in this together now. And I think we just want to underscore that as we continue this conversation, because these conversations can challenge people's belief systems and they can bring about uncomfortable feelings. And we can discuss situations where, you know, as Black people, we've been uncomfortable in trying to pursue design justice and do this collective work. So I just wanted to read that part to reiterate that, you know, this is an open conversation, a respectful conversation, and it's always intended to be rooted in learning and curiosity and growth and equity, ultimately. So, and I guess with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. Well, I'll let them introduce themselves. We're joined by some wonderful gentlemen today who are working in the realms of architecture, planning, and landscape architecture at the intersection of social justice and design activism. And we're here today to have a robust conversation with them. I'm going to kick it off with, I'm going alphabetical order. Is this an alphabetical order by last name? I guess Kofi is right first. I was going to go by the first name, Antoine, but I'll go with Kofi. Sorry.
Kofi Boone, teach landscape architecture at NC State. I'm a Detroit native, went to University of Michigan and practiced at SmithGroup for 10 years before coming south. So happy to be with you today.
Thanks, Kofi.
Thank you. Antoine Bryant, Director of Planning and Development for the City of Detroit. Spent quite a bit of time, as many of you that I may have met, in Houston, Texas. Was there for 18 years. I've now had the opportunity and blessing to be here in Detroit now for coming on 3 years. Came here in July of 21. Excited to be a part of this conversation. I think it's a timely one. And I'm a native of New York, Brooklyn, you know, so it comes out. But really excited to see the conversation we're about to have.
I'm Gary Nelson. I am also a native New Yorker from Long Island, New York, Hempstead, New York. So proud graduate of Hampton University, not the original HU. I was there, the second HU. Been an architect for over 30 years, and most of my architecture has been based on community-based practice. I was the first architect in 2018, first African-American architect hired by the city of Phoenix, where I'm still working. And I'm also a proud member of NOMA and serving as the NOMA West Vice President. Happy to be here.
Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you making time for this conversation today. If you all have questions as we are pursuing this conversation, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have a series of questions that we've already sort of set with the panelists, but we're going to do our best to feed those other questions in to just keep this open dialogue. So yes, please feel free to drop things in the chat respectfully. So I want to kick it off by asking you all, you know, I'm a planner. I'm a native Washingtonian. We're rare these days from Washington, D.C. And I constantly see the ramifications of redlining in the work that I do here at SmithGroup, working with communities of color, helping to write plans and things like that. And I just want to know from you all's perspective, what does redlining mean to you and how does it impact your work today? And whoever wants to go first can go first, but it's open dialogue. So,
you know, we joked about this because this is, you know, I'm glad that you guys are starting this mini series. We'll be here every Friday afternoon, and we look forward to talking to you all about these topics. But I think
time.
Absolutely, I'll jump in and definitely pass it to my brothers here. I think each of us probably has a professional understanding relationship with redlining. but also probably have some level of personal relationship. I grew up in the projects. I was a product of NYCHA, the largest housing authority in the city, in the country, over 200,000 units. And this was moved there in 1973 as a little fella, right, with my parents. And even in quote unquote the melting pot known as New York City, historically, there were certain places you just could not live. All right. And that was in the 70s and 80s, still existed. I remember my parents looking to buy their first home, and were not allowed, or were told by realtors in parts of Brooklyn that we're not going to show you this home because my mom could talk very properly, as the case may be. And then, she would show up and they're like, we're not showing you this home. And it happened a bunch of times. And this was in the 80s in New York City and, in the North. And so as a young kid, I was introduced to what exclusion looked like and how people live. And I wanted to understand why that was and how that was. And that's what led to my desire to focus on design and later urban planning as a professional pursuit. Because I think now we're at a place where we can begin to not only make these challenges much more well known, but we have the authority to combat them. And I think it's a necessity that we actually have these kind of conversations, so people realize that these are structural things that exist, have honest conversations, and then begin to come up with creative but also necessary ways to dismantle them. And they are ways that we are behind on, but I think it's time for us to move, and each of us on this call are making an impact in various ways. And so those are some opening statements for me. Please, Gary, Kofi, y'all jump in.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go next. I'm going to echo from what Antoine said in terms of, the ability to take action is really critical. And it's something that many of us did not have for a long period of time. My story is my parents were one of the first Black families in Hempstead, go to Hempstead back in the day, this is the 50s. And same thing, it was not considered a place where Blacks were welcome and lived. And my mom always tells me the story that, when she tried, even though they had the credit and everything, could afford a house, that it was not unknown that they would pay under the table the people who approved their loans. That was the only way Blacks could get housing and get homes in Long Island, some areas like that. So I definitely in line with what Antoine's saying. I said now, years later, we are more empowered because we are more in different positions to make a difference and become more aware of it. I mean, growing up, I didn't really think about we didn't know about redlining. Redlining existed to the level it is, but now that we're professionals, we can see it. We can see it in education. We can see it you mentioned the food deserts. And now is the opportunity that we can start making a difference. And I think everybody on this meeting can make some difference in some form or way. I'll pass this on to Kofi.
I appreciate it. This is going to be the easiest panel of all time because I'm just going to say ditto to what they said. I'm coming at it more from the academic space and the community space. And I think, what I run into now is young Black and brown people who think that the only way that they can live an economically prosperous life is to move away from their community and are very suspicious of investment. And it's a learning curve when you've grown up for several generations in communities that through policy and through intention were devalued, and that associating mobility with success. So this idea of redlining, which, early 20th century, and there have been many epochs since then. It was talked about in that video, from urban renewal to freeway construction to now with global investment and venture capital discovering real estate markets, a whole different kind of redlining, where the only way to really get to scale at certain levels and projects and have impact, at least in the private sector, it's a little bit out of your hands because there are a lot of large corporate interests that are gobbling up urban real estate as fast as they can get it. But I think at root, the legacy of redlining that I face, in the classroom and in the community space is the work that we have to do to help people understand that investing in their place matters and can make a difference over time, because everything that they've lived through and faced says the opposite. So it's overcoming that with information. It's overcoming that with lifting up great examples, work these two gentlemen and others have done. And quite frankly, it's lifting up these conversations that help people understand that it's not just their individual ability that's determined the prospects of their communities, but it's been 100 years policy making that have led us to this point.
Yeah, I appreciate all your perspectives on that. I too have had similar experiences. I'm like I said, I'm from Washington, D.C., and I don't want it to be missed that redlining's impacts still go on today. You can see it in the district very clearly in terms of the segregation between those who live east of the river and those not. And as the city becomes more gentrified, I can't even afford to buy a home in my neighborhood that I grew up in, which is just adjacent to Lincoln Heights projects. And so all of those people have been moved out. And it's something that I struggle with on a regular basis with this work, having grown up east of the river in Anacostia and Deanwood communities, and now living on Capitol Hill and getting to walk my dog on Capitol Hill and realizing that there are a vast majority of people who are out here walking their dogs and enjoying outdoor spaces and enjoying quality communities, and they don't understand what it's like to not have that. And coming from a community that didn't have that, where you didn't necessarily feel safe all the time, you didn't have open spaces, you didn't have trees, it makes a difference in how your outcomes in life. Your community is like the biggest determinant of how you could turn out. Some of us make it out and fight our way out, and some aren't able to do so, and these systems are still impacting it. So speaking of segregation, I wanted to move into this question of what did integration do to Black communities, and not for Black communities that and what did integration do and not do for Black communities that you see still in work today? I know that's a bit of a loaded question there, so take your time.
I'll start. What integration did, it opened up opportunities that may not have been there before, anywhere from education through employment and careers. And I'll keep it short so we can, I want to have Kofi and Antoine answer as well. So I think it's what it did from that, opening opportunities. What it didn't do was level the playing field. What it didn't do was change the attitude that caused segregation to begin with. Those are the things that was never done with integration. I think people thought, well, integration, it's all said and done. No, you've got generations that feel that Blacks are not equal, and people of color and other minorities are not equal, and that's part of the reason there was segregation. That is the reason segregation happened, and integration doesn't solve that mental that thinking, and then actually having a conversation and addressing that. So that's what it didn't do. But what it did do was provide opportunities that were otherwise not there for many of us on this, and that our parents didn't have or did have, or not as much as our grandparents, and so forth and so on. So that's one of the things integration did. That's, I think, one of the integration. And, on a personal level, my mom said one of the things that integration changed when I was born in '59, and yes, I'm that old. I was born in '59. If I was born in '59 and lived in Atlanta, when they brought me home from the hospital, they would have had to sit in the back of the bus. But they didn't, but that's an example of, how things really, in a short amount of time, that things have still not changed. Now we can fast forward where we can bring our kids and not sit in the back of the bus, so we can go to the hospital in whatever car we want and pick up our kids. And so that's there's been some pluses with integration, but I think it's been misguided in terms of solving all the issues. Kofi, you want to?
Go ahead, Kofi. Give us the academic, brother.
Well, I'm not sure we ever integrated. I think it's sort of, I'm trying to think about when integration actually happened. I mean, I think the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was when legally the same protections that extended to everybody extended to Black people. So that's a shocking number that we're dealing with. I was born in 1970. So 5 years before I was born was when legally, the Constitution, Black people had the same rights as everybody else. Which it's just, so I think that, it's uneven. For me, An example, I'm in the South, and there's an incredible legacy, particularly in North Carolina, of education and Black institutions. North Carolina has the most historically Black colleges and universities of any state. And it's actually something that's permeated a lot of our culture in North Carolina. What's interesting to me was when schools desegregated, there was a big battle about the role of Black educators and what happened to them. And the idea of busing and a way of thinking about integration, which presumed that the way that Black traditions evolved to educate a whole student weren't adequate for everybody. The other way, that you had to go outside of your community, you had to experience other cultures in order to get properly educated. And it's really interesting talking to Black people here that are my parents' age with regards to their perspective of integration, where they felt that across the board that there were really in the midst of the oppression and segregation states, the institutions that were built by Black people were very unique and delivered things in a way that was culturally appropriate. And that got dissolved when a lot of mainstream integration occurred. So I think there are public protections on the books that suggest that integration has occurred. But if you look at demographics, there are a lot of communities, including where I live in Durham, North Carolina, which are more segregated than they were than in 1950. And I think what you're really seeing is the overlap of race and class and caste systems and the mobility of a certain class of people, college educated, middle income, middle wealth, an extreme level of mobility that people who are working class and don't have a lot of resources and disproportionately Black and brown don't. So I think we're still in that project. I don't think we've hit integration yet.
You know, Kofi teed me up because that's what I was going to say to your question. You said, you know, have things changed or how have things changed as integration occurred? And I was like, has it? You know, and I'm not trying to be pejorative. I think that, you know, there is an opportunity for people to look like me to go to schools where I am no longer the majority. It's an opportunity for us to you know, play professional baseball and play professional basketball and ascend certain corporate ladders and other capacities and maybe even get to elected office, right? But for the overwhelming majority of people of color, those doors are still glass doors, right? Where you can kind of see the other side, but you may or may not get through. Then additionally, one of the challenges, and I'll bring up two more, what integration has exposed is that it often becomes one way. And what I mean by that is integration was ideally supposed to allow for better academic opportunities, better work conditions, you know, equity and kind of how the built environment occurs. But what it really did in manifestation was you had a few Black and brown kids being able to go to schools that are mostly white, but you didn't really see mostly white kids going to schools that are Black and brown. And so those schools that were Black and brown ostensibly got worse. Their maintenance lessened, the improvements or lack thereof, the communities were disinvested worse. And so integration actually, in some respects, hastened the decline of some of the systems that we had in place. And then thirdly, and I don't think anyone can disagree with me on this, in every instance, because of segregation, we had these pockets of incredibly proficient and productive towns and centers that had, you know, Black professionals, and you had a Black working class, and that succeeded almost because they absolutely had to. And then every single one of those either was decimated or burned down prior to or right after integration. Why is that? I'm gonna just let that simmer till I go to the next question. Carry on.
Yeah, I want to add to what Antoine just said about, you know, the Harlem Renaissance in some places, you know,
Yeah.
one of the most infamous ones.
Mhm.
You know, going personal experience, I experienced that growing up, and I didn't know what I was experiencing. And I say
Sure.
that because I grew up in New York. My wife grew up in Philadelphia, and I grew up in New York. And where I grew up in Hempstead, I could walk 1 or 2 blocks to my doctor, my pediatrician lived in our neighborhood. Our dentist lived in our neighborhood. The firefighter lived down the street. And so I saw all these different professions in my neighborhood. And I talked to my wife, and she said she had never experienced anything like that. And so I find that really interesting. I grew up in a time when, just like Antoine's saying, that you had professionals in those neighborhoods, in your neighborhoods, close to your neighborhoods. And one of the things that integration did was that some people, they all, when they passed away, they were not replaced. And that became an issue. So it's one thing to actually live it is, it's really different. Especially I can say you experience that Harlem Renaissance when you read about it. And my parents grew up in Harlem. So it was just became being extended. And I'm wondering how many neighborhoods today have those kind of situations where you can walk to your doctor and a dentist and lawyer and things like that.
I mean, most Black communities lack 4 essential things, which is grocery stores, banks, what's the other one? Hospitals and quality schools.
Yeah.
And that still persists till this day. And I appreciate you all sort of highlighting this idea of having, Black professionals in your community of service so that you're sort of inspiring the next generation, and that got sort of disseminated because of integration. And I think it highlights a key point in us being Black designers and planners and how few of us there are in this practice and doing this work. And there are a lot of us, but the numbers are still not anywhere close to where they should be, where people feel fully represented as their neighborhoods are changing and who's designing their neighborhoods and communities. And so I think I appreciate you all highlighting those points. I want to kind of go off the script a little bit and ask you all, what role do you feel your Blackness plays in your work? I mean, I know it's hard to separate or segregate them, but I would like to know how you would express that and how it's impacted your work and growth and trajectory.
I'm trying to be polite. Let my kinfolk go first.
I'll let Kofi take this one first.
Go ahead, Kofi.
Gary, you're the senior brother. Speaking of Black culture, I defer to the senior brother to take it on.
Yield to the elder.
The elder. So you threw me off there. So
I can jump in. I can jump in if you're collecting your thoughts. I mean, I think that. I went to Michigan in the 90s. There was a lot of energy at that time to think about the canon of our profession and how little has been documented in terms of the official canon of what we do. Toni Morrison, who spoke while we were at Michigan, and we were all sitting there amazed at what she was doing regarding literature in terms of reclaiming a cultural lens on how we saw the world. As academic, that's kind of where I see my role with regards to Blackness as culture. So there's a whole discussion about race that's different, but the cultural traditions that we have evolved before contact with colonialism and in America, and to survive it and endure it, and how we pass those traditions along. And it turns out that there's a lot out there in terms of how we've thought about cities, how we thought about architecture, how we thought about agriculture, how we've thought about leisure and open space, mobility, recreation. That's just not in the canon, that you can't go, to a library or online and find that information. So I've found a lot of what I've tried to do is to document that and to make it available and accessible to people as a way to think about ideas and a way to think about how what we perceive as a gap, which is to say, you could see the canon of design and think that certain cultures and certain people had a monopoly on how we think about the world around us and how we interact with it, when in fact, that's not the case at all. It's just we have not done the job that we need to do to include those other perspectives in the canon. So that's what it's motivated me to do, is to say there's a gap. Can we find ways to fill it? Even if it's just project by project, how we talk to people, how we document the places we work with, the kind of archival research that we do, the kind of questions we ask, that contributes to that.
Now that I collected my thoughts, thanks for letting me get that. I appreciate that. As we go older, we need to collect our thoughts a little bit more. But with that said, going along with what you said, there's a couple of things in terms of I will say personally, professionally, and then I'll say community-wise. And professionally, I happen to now be in a position which, which and Anton's in a similar position, where we can really see in terms of using our Blackness in culture, in terms of work that's going on in our cities, our respective cities. And one of the things that can use that is, and I use it, not only my Blackness, but my aware and respect of other cultures. And I'm going to use this as an example. Like South Phoenix is the area most Blacks live, but there's other parts like Chandler and other areas. Those who know Phoenix know what I'm talking about. But one of the things about Phoenix is, they had community centers, but not designed by people who didn't know anything about the African American culture. The significance of how the elderly people, them playing cards in the afternoon, how important that is. And so what I would instill, I would always make sure that we are going to have design firms that are aware of that. And I would bring up topics. And my favorite topic is, I never needed a clock to say what time to go home when you're outside playing, because everybody knows when the street lights go on, you got to go home. So hence the importance of street lights. I mean, we all had that experience, how the importance of stooping is, and that's an African-American culture, how important stooping is, where you
Yes.
see people. And those are the things that I really impressed upon the client departments, the architects that selected, anybody who was involved in it. That's one of the things that I did, was just to instill that. And I said, you have all the cultures. You have the Latino culture has certain things. You have Irish culture, Italian culture. There's not a homogenous design in community base. And I think that's one of the things I'm really proud of trying to project. And that goes into the hiring of firms that reflect, the community, are knowledgeable, respectful of the community. And so those are the kind of things that I did. And then in the person, in terms of when the personal front is, I didn't see my first Black architect till I was in college. And going to what we say in terms of the need, that I feel myself to be out in the community as much as possible, to talk to the next gen as much as possible, talk to those in college, those who are starting off their careers as much as possible. Since I'm now an OG now, I've seen some shit. To be perfectly honest. But with that, I really want to make sure that I lend to that all the time. And I was taught that by my parents and my family.
First of all, I gotta say, I gotta give, first of all, big shouts to Gary for having a Knicks poster in his background. Much love on that one. Much love for using stooping as a verb. I didn't know it was a verb, but props on that. I know exactly what he's talking about, because we were on the stoop. Much love to Kofi for having a big Kool-Aid cup. You know what I'm saying? He kept it real with y'all, and that's how we roll it, because he's a professional, but he still keeps it 100. I think. I'm a tall Black guy, and I've been with it for a long time. And it's something that when I was a kid and growing up in New York in the late 70s and early 80s, and it was challenged because it was every definition of the ghetto. It just was. Now, when my parents moved there, it was affordable housing, right? That's where you moved in the 70s, and it was fine. And we had block parties and all that kind. It was great, actually. And then I remember in about 1980, crack came, changed the game, and just changed the game, whole generation gone. And when I was growing up, I wanted to figure out a way, how can I change how we live? That was we had one of those, y'all all had it. What do you want to be when you grow up, in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade or whatever? And I had, I asked, what do I want to be? And my dad said, well, you want to change how you live, you want to be an architect. And he didn't know what architect was, and I didn't know what architect was. But I've told this story a couple times. My dad is the quintessential got a guy. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, everybody got that person. You need somebody to change your tires? I got a guy. That was my dad. And so my dad knew a Black architect. So I actually met one when I was 10, which is somewhat uncommon. I met Harry Simmons. He was the architect in Brooklyn, and he did residential architecture, and he blew my mind. Fast forward a few years, and I got accepted to Cornell architecture, which was fantastic, but was very theoretical. And for someone that was a kid from Brooklyn that got good grades, went to a good school, but wanted to change how we live, asking me to do a villa in France didn't really resonate with me. I was like, what we talking about? Like, what we talking about? And so when I was exposed to what planning was and how you were looking at the socioeconomic status, looking at demographics, looking at history, looking at culture of how the entire built environment comes to be. I ate that up. And so I transferred and got my undergrad in planning. And I went to grad school for architecture because I still wanted to design. And ultimately, how who I am translates into what I do is it's a lens that I can't lose sight of, right? The entire I've actually taken a very different trajectory than either one of my colleagues because I wanted to get exposure and be involved in every part of the built continuum. So I've worked at a nonprofit entity. I've developed housing. I've written my own new market tax credit applications. I've done low-income housing tax credit applications. I've worked for a nonprofit. I've been a property manager working for a housing authority for a couple of years. I've worked for a transit entity in Houston. I worked for the largest Black-owned design firm, worked for Moody Nolan for 4 years. So I've seen different ways to influence how and where we live. And then when I, quite frankly, got the call to be a planning director for a major American city, it was, I had to, that was the aha moment, right? It was like, okay, you have literally and figuratively the ability to help shape the direction of an entire city. And oh, by the way, it just happens to be the largest Black city with the largest population or percentage of African Americans in the entire country. And so, leapt at the chance. And it's been exciting. It's been a challenge. It's sometimes a booger bear, right? But it's been something that I would never trade. And as I've shared in lectures also, being a planning director is like being an NBA coach. Ain't but like 30 of these jobs when it comes to the big cities. And so if you get an opportunity, let's jump into it. And you also get that opportunity, and I kind of saw some of the questions that people popping up. You get the arduous challenge to even think about reparations. I'm gonna just drop that right there.
Isn't your job fun? That sounds like fun to me. But I appreciate all that feedback, and I really love the commentary around how Black culture and coming from Black culture has sort of created this lens through which we experience space and we do our work, but also allows us to be more empathetic to other people who are going through struggle and bring those things to the forefront to have those conversations, because it really is challenging when your culture is being perceived as something that's a threat. DC just passed or just reformed some of their policing laws that they had reformed previously post George Floyd. And one of the mandates is that, you can't gather in a group of 2 or more in what is constituted as a drug-free zone. So this idea of stooping, where you're gathering in 2 or 3 at the stoop right in front of your house, just hanging out, just kicking the bobo, like that can now be held against you and you can now be locked up for that. And those things, not having the voices of people of color when we're thinking about implementing those laws and what the impact of those laws are. When DC dropped the speed limit from 25 miles an hour to 20, totally respect Vision Zero, all for biking, multimodal, I'm here for it. But one of the things that it did do was create more opportunities for police to come in contact with lower income people of color, and they got more subjected to tickets, because I'm not watching the news to know that it dropped 5 miles per hour and you're profiling me, but I digress. And I think what happens is a lot of this gets highlighted in popular culture, in our music, and the music reflects our communities and where we come from. And so it documents the history of where we've been and how we've transitioned. And so I would love to hear you all's thoughts on like, what ways does history play a role in your work, and how do you work to maintain that? Can you hear me, Gary?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. And what ways how can we maintain those narratives, those untold stories in our history, in our work today? How do you all do that today?
I think what I've done is let people know about it, because a lot of people just don't know. And so, I'm including myself. I didn't know a lot about redlining. I wasn't taught it in school. And so I'm talking to other people about it. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've been doing is, in the past, I might have been quiet or not say something to people for whatever reason it was. All of us know about code switch in our careers and otherness. And one of the things that I would say that after, after George Floyd was murdered, I decided no more code switching. I decided no more otherness. I decided to talk about things that other people to know, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable, they have to learn it. And they have to be open to it. And another thing was we started a chapter here in Arizona, a place that Anton knows, the last place that no one probably ever thought would have a chapter would be in Arizona. But not only do we have a chapter in Arizona, from Arizona sprung Portland, where we had our conference, sprung Utah, sprung San Diego, and now New Mexico. We had a new meeting in New Mexico. What that says is, we have a history, a deep history, but we're not the only history that's hidden. But one of the things but our history, I let people know our history as much as possible. We have the Say It Loud exhibit that celebrates the diversity. And that's one of the things that I really do, is just letting more and more inform people and educate people as much as possible of the things that they didn't know that I didn't know, but they need to know, and they need to know basis. And I'm not sure if that answering your question. I'm not. Is that kind of answering your question?
You're keeping history alive by constantly telling it, reiterating it, sharing it, and exposing it to other people. I think that's wonderful.
I think what Gary highlighted, and I think what you guys are doing an excellent job of doing, even by hosting this, is education, right? A lot of what we're talking about, a lot of people don't know. And it's not taught in our traditional educational spheres. And ironically, more and more, even in our information age, it's being revealed less and less, right? So, I got your book right here. It stays on my desk. And actually, I make every senior leader in our office read it. That's probably somewhat against the law, but that's okay. We try to say, and because most people don't know about redlining, most people don't understand the ghettos didn't just happen, right? They were that there really were almost promoted and were formed that way. It's about having uncomfortable conversations. And so I have I have more of a history in my professional career and engagement than I actually do in hardcore planning, as it were. But it has allowed me to promote a conversation that people may not necessarily want to be in. But when you have it from a point of compassion and a desire to actually and genuinely share, as opposed to being retaliatory or accusatory, then people are often more apt to listen and to want to communicate further. And so I've had conversations with people about, how did we get here? What is this about? Why do you think highways ran through Black neighborhoods as opposed to around them? Why do you think that our mobility systems stop less or don't stop at all in communities of color? Why is there many of our communities are flood prone, right? Just have these, what is the need for environmental justice, right? What does that even mean? And oftentimes when you're able to have these kinds of conversations and then inform people with the history that substantiates that need, it often will awaken at least the opportunity for people to appreciate it. And it matters. And to your point, and this we're gonna probably tease this out at some point, it's those kinds of conversations that architects can have with their sphere of influence, with their family, with their friends, right? Because I know someone's over here, someone in the audience is like, I'm just a designer 3. How can I make a difference in the built environment and historical racism? Well, boom. Now you know more about redlining than half the people in your family. So now you can talk to them about it, right? And I think there are a number of different ways that even people that are, designers, you have a tremendous amount of influence and reach, and definitely more than you probably think you do.
I think I want to add to what Anton's saying is that for too many years, and architects, designers sometimes just think of this is the world. It's very narrow, and there's a lot of things going on outside our world. But you've been taught You know, I've been led to believe that, you know, people lead you to believe that architecture is homogenous and it's all the same thing. But no, if you're not aware of what's going on out there in the world, then how can you design for the world? And that's one of the things that I said, you know, read a paper. I say that all the time because people are just so focused on design. Well, design means you're designing for people. You're not operating in a vacuum. And that's something that I really stress upon. And then going back to in terms of our educating, there's so many hidden figures out there. We all know that there's so many hidden figures. And one of the conversations that I had, like you said, uncomfortable conversations, I remember clearly one of the conversations regarding redlining would come from white colleagues that would say, well, everybody had a chance to buy a home. And I stopped them right then and there and says, do you know that, you know, if my grandfather fought in World War II, he was not eligible for the GI Bill. He was not eligible to go to college. He was not eligible to buy a home. And that's really enlightening to people. Yeah, you can't use, you know, what about this and not know the whole story. And a lot of people don't know the whole story. And that's where this is where I think an opportunity, or we're obligated, or this is something we should be doing, is knowing the whole story so we can inform them the whole story.
Yeah, I'm with that. You know, all I would really add is, you know, just the idea that history is not the past. And I think this is
that's a great point.
A different cultural lens that comes out of this. And with regard to redlining, and I'll try and put some finer points on it. We all talk about now what are alternative structures that can help people who have low wealth to control and own land, in part in response to what happened with redlining and urban renewal and all the other displacements. And two things that come up all the time are cooperatives and community land trusts. Both of those, even though they have some seeds and threads in other places, came out of Black resistance movements. There's an incredible archive, writings of W.B. Du Bois coming right out of Reconstruction, advocating for cooperatives as a way to lift Black communities out of poverty as a part of Reconstruction, to compensate for the lack of individual wealth as a structure. And up until the early 20th century, there were about 4,000 Black-owned cooperatives, worker cooperatives, producer cooperatives, land cooperatives all over the country. And they developed pamphlets and they had kits and they had training programs and all that stuff. Community land trusts, which are attempting to, for better and for worse, I heard Antoine laughing, so it's not a slam dunk. But as an idea, you know, it has precedence in Europe and other places, but really got popularized in Southwest Georgia with Fannie Lou Hamer and the proposition of the Mississippi Freedom Farms as a way to deal with descendants of sharecroppers who were, even in that impoverished place, at risk of displacement. And how can you start to operate outside of the constraints of traditional capitalism, real estate, and land exploitation that defines our country? And codified by the Schumacher Center, by Charles Sherrod and his whole crew. The template, if you have a community land trust in your community, it probably came from the template that they generated in Southwest Georgia. And they saw it as an economic extension of the modern civil rights movement. So the point I'm making with regards to history and with regards to dealing with these issues, these long-term issues, is that there's always an opportunity to not just sort of hold history up like a artifact in a museum, but to think about the themes and the practices and figure out how to translate them to meet contemporary challenges. And that's like real history when you can live it and you can practice it.
Thank you for that. We are at 1:30, and I think it would be good to leave the last 30 minutes to answer some questions in the chat. I guess, are there questions in the chat, or?
There are a lot of
good ones
questions
in the chat.
Okay, it's booming. Okay. And I think maybe some of these questions asked this, I haven't seen them, but before we get into that, just one last question to kind of lead into the Q&A of, you know, what is it that we as designers outside of community engagement, what can we do to sort of combat the ramifications of redlining in our work? What are your recommendations, especially for a firm like ours that's large, architecture, engineering driven? What are the opportunities for us?
I would say allow your every member to be involved in the community, not just after hours. There are councils, there are committees for different neighborhoods that desperately want volunteers. And I think everybody should be a volunteer in their respective community, but sometimes those meetings occur in the afternoon, or they occur like right after work. And so it becomes a challenge for members to do both. And I think, some companies allow, and I don't know if Smith Group does this or not, but some companies will allow a certain amount of time for community involvement, whether it be attending and being a member of a committee or something like that in their public city or a school board or something like that. That'd be my advice, is to be involved in your community.
I would add to that. I would emphatically really reemphasize that and say not only be involved, but be active, right? So I know you guys have an office here, and we've actually got some contracts with you guys. You guys are doing a great job here in Detroit. But I've done a lecture a couple times, and Taft knows this. I used to do it at NOMA years ago to architects about just shut up. And the premise is it's because architects talk too damn much. And that's why everybody laughing, I'm telling the truth. And and too often you're taught, and nothing to do with anybody personally, you're taught to be the smartest person in the room. And you come into so many meetings with the big ideas, and we haven't listened to anybody yet. And so, you come in as a subject matter expert and haven't had taken the time to either listen to the residents have to say about whatever it may be, but also to really acculturate and become a part of the community that you're trying to serve. And so one of the things that I found real success with, and I've taught my staff here and other places, is just start going to stuff, just like what Gary said. Go to the PTA meeting, go to the block club. I promise you, you will learn so much just by being in the room. And invariably, you're like the weird person, because after a while, people are like, who's so and so? They keep coming to these things, and then you get to say, "Oh, I'm Joe. Don't mind me. Hi, Joe." And then after a while, everybody knows Joe. Joe's the good dude. He comes in, he just want to pay attention. But you are now beginning to create a very genuine rapport with whatever community that you're being a part of, and you get to honestly understand that community. And thirdly, you'd be surprised what kind of expertise that you may have that will be that much more applicable once you understand the community that you're engaging. And so just go somewhere and sit down somewhere. Talk too damn much. That's what the problem is.
I love it. I think one is we know where all the redlined places were. So if you don't do anything else, the Mapping Inequality project, the University of Richmond, they've digitized every red line map in the United States. So as a part of your design process, maybe consider doing a scan to see whether or not the community you're working with dealt with redlining, like specifically. There were institutions that emerged to help communities survive through that period of time. So churches, local banks, other institutions that may still be around. And may be the last Black-owned large investors and stakeholders and communities you're working with. I think it would be great to build relationships with those. And as a part of working in those communities, find ways to support and assist them as they try to remain in place. I think that there's a lot of momentum in infrastructure investment right now through Just 40 initiative and a few other places. And that's where the federal government has specifically targeted every federal agency to invest 40% of their just transition resources into communities that were affected by the legacies that we're talking about. And there are a lot of communities that need a lot of technical assistance and support to prepare to properly receive and steward those resources. So what a lot of us would consider pre-design work before a project is conceived, but building relationships with the communities with the intent of helping them to identify projects that can take advantage of these sort of once-in-a-generation set of federal resources, I think would be a great role for large corporate interests.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Smith Group as a whole, I think we all have more work to do. I think one way we can to combat this is also work with our clients in helping convincing them why we need funding upfront for trust building, for engagement, to champion these ideas. A lot of times there's not enough time in the budget, there's not enough money in the budget to engage in that way, and also convincing our clients that it's ultimately helpful for their bottom line to have somebody not object to your project because you got out ahead of it. So I think there's ways we can do more. I applaud the JEDI committee for all the work that they do and all of the folks who are doing this work within Smith Group, and encourage us to do more. And so with that, we'll just go over to some questions in the chat.
So first question, I think there are still covert redlining practices like using zip codes to deny loans. Outside of talking about it, is there anything we can do in our work to address racism that persists in the shadows?
So that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that one up. I don't know if it exists in the shadows. It's pretty upfront, you know what I'm saying? When you're using the zip code and all your partners in the zip code can't get it, and you put your auntie zip code on there and you get the loan, right? That's not exactly in the in the shadows. What I think that there's a couple things that we can do. And there's two options, two kind of choices. I've been thinking about this for a while, and Gary and I have talked about this offline previously. Why is it that we don't have more architects and designers run for office?
Yes.
So
Amen.
I'm gonna just put that out there.
Sorry.
I think
Sorry.
I'm not sure. My wife said she was gonna listen in. I'm not sure if she's here or not. But I had a couple of opportunities to run for office, and quite frankly, if I wasn't here in Detroit, I probably would be in elected office in Houston right now. Because I think we need people that can actually affect legislation. So that's one thing. But then secondly, and this is something we're in a very nascent stages here talking about. I think we have to kind of begin to call to task some of our financing entities, right? I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a bank vice president or a bank trustee, and they tell me about their CRA programs and all of that. And I'm like, I think at the top level, that sounds wonderful. But, at your branches, you still have people that are not giving people mortgages, right? And I mean, I can show you data if you want me to show it to you. And so can I get you to commit to having an equity-based dispersal of construction loans and permanent mortgage loans to households across? Can we get that? Let's have some real conversation, right? Because I cannot tell you how many peers, and I'm sure Gary got a few, I'm sure Kofi got a few, of friends, colleagues, maybe even ourselves, trying to get a loan and got denied, check all the boxes, but you have a friend or another couple that does look like you, and they're like, I don't understand the problem is. I got one. They got two of them, right? And so we need to have some real conversations to break down that. Those are two things anybody in this call can initiate. So, I'll write a check for you when you run for office. Knock yourself out.
I'll remember that.
I know about Harvey. Harvey retired. Harvey ain't leave Harvey alone, man. Come on now. Somebody talk about Harvey can't. Man, let Harvey live. God dog.
Yeah, we do have another question.
Yeah. We have another question in the chat, but do you believe gentrifiers hold a particular responsibility in these gentrified spaces? Additionally, how can the process of gentrifying neighborhoods be managed in a manner that is responsible and considerate of existing communities?
Can I answer part of that?
Yeah, you can.
Stop treating people who are from these communities like they're outsiders to these communities. That's the biggest thing I've noticed. Like, seeing the gentrification in my own community is a level of entitlement and a level of intentional sort of blindness to what's happening in the community. Where I lived, it was really difficult because I was witnessing like people who looked like me, family members, sort of struggling day to day, and we're having issues around like drugs and crime and all these things in DC. And I see people just walk by it. I'm in San Fran at the ASLA conference, Kofi. People are just, we're going to Salesforce Park to see it, landscape architects, and we're just stepping over homeless people, walking by, and so I just feel like we have an obligation to be aware of our surroundings and aware how we contribute to those spaces, and not just ignore what's happening as if it doesn't impact you, or that's not my problem, So that's one of the things that I feel like I see a lot, and I would love for that to be different.
I've seen that a lot in terms of the change with the younger generation and the up and coming who really do care about that and
Yes.
definitely more. So I applaud them for doing that.
Yeah, I think, unpopular opinion, I don't think gentrification and displacement are the same thing.
Mm,
I agree.
agreed.
So I think who doesn't want new investment in their community? But I think what people are investing in is the property and the real estate. And I think that because of their economic advantage, they want the social systems to transform to what they're doing because they see their financial investment in their real estate and their property is giving them more power than people that are there. And that's a part of the, I would say, soft displacement, which is somebody like me, I'm a professor at a predominantly white institution. If I moved into a community that didn't have the same income level I did, black or white, I would be considered a gentrifier. Mm-hmm. But, what can I do? Well, I think that it's a mindset in terms of investing in the community and in the neighborhood of which you are a part and not just the property and the real estate. So getting to know your neighbors, going to visit and patronize the local businesses, learning what the local rituals are. Every community has its own rituals. There are people you're supposed to greet, you're supposed to say hello to. There are things you're supposed to support and deal with to be a part of that community. So I think in some ways, people, I'm not saying this is the spirit of this particular question, but when I hear this question a lot, it's a lot of people feeling guilty because they want to go and live and be a part of these communities, but they don't want to feel like they're exploiting them. There are two levels of the exploitation. One is economics, and that's a much tougher conversation in terms of who can afford to hold and control property. But the other part is social and cultural, and I think we can do a lot more on the soft side to not displace the local traditions, rituals, and habits of communities, and instead consider ourselves as investors to support that, because that's why we moved there in the first place. So I wanted to kind of split that a bit and say, I don't want to be a displacer. I don't want to displace the culture that attracted me to that community in the first place. And that's something that we do have some control over.
I want to double down on Brother Kofi, and I agree. Not only do I agree with everything he's said, I'm in the beginning stages, and now I got 200 something accountability partners of writing a book about gentrification that should be coming out by Christmas. Y'all can look on Amazon, it'll be all on your platforms. But I think that to that point, and that's why I appreciate your dichotomy between displacement and gentrification, because two very real situations I was a part of. I was working in Houston's Third Ward. There's a brother named Brother Benjamin. Everybody knew Brother Benjamin. Brother Benjamin was gifted, but had some challenges. And he would walk around the neighborhood playing the saxophone, up and down the street, all times of day and night. As the Third Ward got gentrified, people were like, I love Third Ward. It's so musical. It's so cultural. It's awesome. It's great. Y'all know how this plays out. The neighborhood changes, and then all of a sudden, people were calling the police on Brother Benjamin. They're like, the man playing this music, I don't understand. Why is he playing? Damn it, you moved to the community because you thought it was rich and cultural and da-da-da-da-da. And now that you're here, you have a problem with it. It goes right to Kofi's point. If you move somewhere for the intrinsic value of that area, then you have to appreciate what it's about. And I'm not asking you that you have to appreciate that there's broken bottles and all those kinds of things. You have the wherewithal and the capacity to help get that changed. But the things like stooping and like having the back and forth on a Friday evening, yeah, that's what the community is about. And that's what people that watching over each other and are intimately aware of. The flip side of it, I have a colleague, a friend of mine, he's a Cornell guy, Ed Pettit. Ed Pettit is from Buffalo, New York. Ed Pettit is, as he calls himself, the whitest of white guys. You're right. That's what he calls himself. It's wonderful. Ed Pettit moved to like the grimiest part of Third Ward. Like, I mean, the third ward that some of the brothers be like, I don't even fool with that part. Ed Pettit moved over there, bought a house, a little ramshackle kind of house. And two of his brothers come from Buffalo. They rebuilt it, and now he lives there full time. And he actually Airbnbs part of the other spots. And he has, he actually worked in a Botswana. He does a lot with public health. He's a wonderful guy, but he not only made himself a part of the community, but he used his relationships and, quite frankly, his privilege to help get resources to get the park done, to get city council to pay attention to the neighborhood, like all that kind of stuff. But did not try to change the character of the area, but used the relationships and resources he had to better it from a physical standpoint and from a resource gap standpoint. And so that really, those two stories speak to kind of the difference between displacement and gentrification a bit of Kofi's kind of discussion. And I think, I have a whole lecture about gentrification we can talk about, but I know you got 14 other questions. So we want to get to that. And just look out for my book. It'll be here between December and January 1st, 25. Can't wait to see you. There you go, everybody.
That's excellent, man. Congratulations.
Oh, Doc, I'm working, Doc.
We'll bill you for the promo. Just kidding. No, but thank you so much for those responses. I mean, I always reference DC because it's a pretty solid example of a lot of these things, but the Don't Mute DC movement in response to people moving into the Shaw community and asking them to stop playing the go-go music, or the people coming to Howard University's campus and, letting their dogs use the bathroom on this what we consider to be sacred ground as a HBCU. And so making an effort to understand that context is really, really important. I saw a hand, and then there's more questions in the chat.
Well, yeah,
I just was gonna say, I remember when that thing happened live. I was watching CNN, and the dude was walking a damn dog, and he was like, "Can't they move to school?" And I was like, "Did he really just say that on TV? Did he really just?" Okay, all right.
I mean, and I just think it again goes back to this idea of sharing your history and your culture, and that's a part of the culture of HBCUs is our campuses. Like I went to Spelman College, and you can't walk on the grass. That is like Spelman women do not walk on grass. That's like a no-no. But most people, if you come there and you're not educated and you don't know, you might walk on the grass and disrespect our sacred land. So, right. Or be on the news looking foolish. Like.
There are a lot of questions, so I'm trying to shift them out, but in your roles, how do you navigate the justifiable fear and distrust? And what do you think enables people to embrace hope and optimism when new investments are coming into their community?
I don't really deal with too much from my perspective about the investments coming into community. What I deal with is more the budgets, what the city's doing. And what I try to do is make sure that, when these new budgets come out, that that where they're not just based on zip code and on area code, that is based on, if there's an area that has, well-different libraries and they're slated for funding for expansion of those libraries, but there's another area that doesn't have any libraries at all, then I at least try to bring it to the attention of people in those departments and say, we're seeing disparity here where we've got a shift of money. So that's, even though I'm not the decision maker with it, what I can do is influence, at least bring it up. That's the thing I always say, sometimes I may not be able to make the change. If I don't bring up the change, if I don't bring up that there's a disparity there that people may or may not know, then change is not going to happen that way. So that's one of the things that I've been doing, is trying to make sure that it is as that the money is being appropriated as best it can be, or at least to state my opinion.
Yeah. So when you notice that disparity in the communities, often these communities have experienced disparity for a long period of time. And so they don't really trust the change that's coming. So how do you all work to sort of build that trust with the community so that the change that is coming, they come to the meetings and have a voice? I have so many community members like, I'm not coming to that meeting. Like, they're not about to do nothing. The city is not going to do anything. I'm like, but that's the reason you have to come to the meeting, because your voice is a data point that I can quantify and then share and say, this is why this community needs this, because all of these people said this and they don't have this. So how do we build that trust with the community? What are some?
I think there's a term that you hear a lot, especially in the nonprofit sector, but it needs to get propagated more and more, is that you try to operate at the speed of trust, and you can't rush it, right? And unfortunately, many of our communities have every right to be distrustful, right? It's something that I've had to deal with personally here in Detroit, because we have a city that's been in various states underinvested for decades. And then unfortunately, the administration has been the culprit in much of the challenges that Black and Brown residents have dealt with. And so I can't tell you how many meetings I've gone to, and oh, you work for the city, and you get a lot of all of that. And I've had to train my staff. First of all, I've made it a point, and I said this publicly when I first got here, to visit every neighborhood in the city. There are over 204, 205 of them. It took me about a year, uh, because it was important that the director of planning, they saw the director of planning. They didn't see the staff. They didn't see some other people. And when I got there, I had to let people fuss and cuss, and I had to eat it and say, you're right. There is generational trauma in many of our communities here in Detroit, and it's well deserved, right? That the city bears the brunt of the accusations. And so, but to that, your earlier point, once people see that you own it, not necessarily, I can't just say, I won here, it won me. Like, I have to say this, much of the challenges that you've existed are valid. But I want to be here to listen, and I want to be here to begin to discuss what solutions can look like. And when you say, I want to hear from you and I want to be part of a collaborative team, then people really do accept that you're genuine about your motives. And then also have some honesty about them. So parts of town are going to be easier to improve than other parts, because of not only the adjacencies of other uses, but also of the flowing of resources and also catalytic things that are existing. And so my commercial corridor that goes right into downtown is going to be an easier and a quicker one than on the northeast side that's been tremendous disinvestment, and we've had to demolish some buildings. The former took 18 months to turn around. And Livernois, that people may be familiar with Detroit. Gratiot to 7 Mile is going to take me 4, 5, 6 years. And if I tell people we're focused on you, we want to hear from you, it's going to take me longer. People say, you know what, I appreciate that you're being honest and that you're listening. And we're going to have an engaged and consistent conversation. So now we're good. And then that same mama offered me banana pudding next week. And so, it's that kind of thing. You develop a relationship and then you're good.
So we have about 4 minutes left. Do you have time for one more question?
We have a closing question. As humans and as architecture professionals, how do we influence change in the practice when it comes to this work? I know this was answered a little bit within our discussion, but I think it's good to leave us off sort of on an actionable note for the firm. So anyone would like to go first?
I'll run with it. Since I'm the OG, I'll go ahead and give my final thought. So I think I would use SmithGroup as an example of what can be done. You have this JEDI group that you're doing, and a lot of firms don't, or a lot of firms don't see the value in it. And then I personally experienced your SmithGroup walking the walk. The member of your office in Phoenix, Michelle Ray, started the Say It Loud Arizona. And she's really cognizant of the importance for diversity design. She led the organizing it. I'm not sure if she's on this or not, but I think she was out for a while. But SmithGroup's by doing that, by walking the walk. I always say that all the time. By walking the walk. Just don't say it, but like you said, in order to make action, run for office, be part of organizing. Walking the walk, having a conversation, not just say, but actually do. Those are that's what I would say. It's just walking the walk, not just do beyond just talking about it, and complaining about it. Find out what solutions and how can you make a difference in those solutions happening.
The future. So we've talked a lot about the past, but we have a lot of things on our radar right now where the current generation just really needs to get engaged and move forward. So a thought is maybe some seed grant money to fuel innovation at SmithGroup to figure out how to address some of these issues. So maybe a small scalable project that doesn't overwhelm you. I know you're all only working like 40 hours a week. Everybody's leaving at 5 o'clock on Friday. I know that's true. Bunch of architects. But I think that rather than a top-down do X, Y, and Z is provide incentives for creative people. You all are creative people, innovative people, to propose small-scale, scalable strategies that could grow up into practices. So I think it doesn't always have to be putting money in the mouth of communities that you serve. Sometimes it's internal work to create the proper environment to see that kind of innovation. So that would be a great next step.
3 things, make it quick. Finish this book. Secondly, have this conversation. I know, well done. Have this conversation again and again and again, and not on Black History Month. Okay, and I'm so serious about that. Even if it's leap year, it's still Black History Month. And then thirdly, be more intentional in what you do and talk to someone who you know needs to hear this conversation. And everybody on this call knows there's somebody that could not make it because of work, and I get that, but someone who chose not to. And we know who those are, and start to have those uncomfortable conversations.
Well, thank you so much. That was a great note to end on. I want to send a shout out to all the people that made this possible. Our panelists, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our marketing team for helping us put this together. Thank you, National Jedi and the Black History Month Committee and all those folks at Smith Group who are doing this work, who are leading the charge in this Jedi initiatives. So thank you and happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month.
It was
Thanks. Take
our
care.
pleasure to be here. Greatly
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.